Hello everyone and welcome back to this channel. I thought I'd just do a reading catch-up today. I've been doing videos about my ridiculous book club I've been considering, and, but I want to put together today things I've been reading just for myself. This is my book club, which is like whatever the hell I want to read book club, which is all the time really. Anyway, in the past week I've been going through all of these. I'm still in the midst of Scream, 40 years of Scream, the horror comic that I collected religiously in the 1980s, in 1984 when I was 14, and this was the scariest comic in the world. And Rebellion Comics have released this, I talked about this earlier, this huge volume pulling together every issue, all 15 issues, and everything that was in them, except for the summer specials, and I'm hoping that they'll come out separately at some point. Still enjoying those. In some ways, it's just nostalgia. You kind of get nothing, hi socks, nothing further out of them. They're not, hello. It's not like reading a graphic novel where there's further stuff to be got from it. They are frozen in time, and they're very much for a certain age group. Teenage boys like I was then, who enjoyed slightly macabre stories. I was thinking about what Alan Moore said recently about graphic novels. Alan Moore, who of course is in here, that binding together a whole pile of comics isn't a novel. A novel is something quite different. It's aiming at something different. And he was quite cutting about kids stuff, pretending to be grown-up stuff. And I think he's got a point. I like things to know who they're talking to, I suppose, which audience. Anyway, because of that, this means that this is a kind of a book to dip into rather than something to just read as if it was all in one piece. Although some parts, I mean, the Dracula story, which is this kind of very Cold War kind of adventure, putting Dracula in a different context of kind of Eastern Europe in the 1980s, is very interesting. A kind of Frederick Forsyth take on Dracula. I'm quite interested in that, going back to that, because I think that's got more to it than I maybe would have got out of it at 14. Anyway, it's all relative, isn't it? My hair is sticking up. I got a rude comment about my sticking up hair on here. My first rude comment on, on YouTube the other day. Right, this was rather less than the sum of its parts, I thought. Days at the Morisaki bookshop, which people have raved about. I thought it began well and then went off in a direction I wasn't expecting. Clearly the beginning of a sequence. I'm not sure I would go back and read another. It was a bit of a letdown. I fell for the hype, and I think I've said that before about this one. It was about a week ago, and we went to an indie bookshop, and yes, fell for the recommendations. It felt so bookshoppy and nice that I felt sure it would be good, but it wasn't quite. I think the best book about a bookshop is still The Never-Ending Story, but the best book about a shop that has the same kind of feeling to it is probably The Music Shop, I think it's called, by Rachel Joyce. The idea of a shop that is endangered by the encroaching modernity and is a last bastion of cultural stuff that people care about. And I really enjoyed that one. This, not so much. I think I'm going to stop falling for the blandishments, for the hype around books to do with slightly magical realist bookshops and department stores. That other one about the department store let me down as well. Right, Armistead Maupin, I spent a good part of the week with, number 10 in his Tales of the City series, which I've been reading since I was 20, 34 years ago, when I read the first 5 or 6 in the series. This is set in the early 90s, back in that day, and he makes that a historical period, the time I was living through then, and it feels very dated. Not very dated. It feels like he reaches into that early 90s epoch. Although he's writing about the UK, and his grip on the UK isn't as firm as his grip on San Francisco. So that's, there's a kind of romanticized feeling of old England and the Cotswolds and big houses and posh people, and it's got a bit of a glow about it. I think, as I said before, it's nicely plotted, and I got to the end and it all kind of weaves together, but it's very sketchy, I think, by the end. I didn't feel it had the kind of blood and guts of his earlier books. But maybe that's all right. It turns into a kind of fairy tale and everyone winds up okay, although we know it's not going to be okay for some characters because we've read the later volumes. So it's very much dependent on its setting, the books around it, whatever it is, 6 books before and 3 books after. Anyway, Jeremy's calling and he's still trying to get on these videos. Socks is over there and he's, hang on. Yes, he gets his way into these videos. They all want to be in it. And lastly, this is what I've spent the last 2 or 3 days on, Katherine Rundell's Impossible Creatures. Now, I'd read one before by her and hadn't quite chimed with it. This is reminding me why I love fantasy. Fantasy with monsters, mythical monsters, and adventure in it. As a nice beginning, setting up the steps that the boy takes into a mysterious world and meeting new people. Then there's about, 50 pages where it kind of treads water, literally. Then suddenly, halfway through, story kicks in a big way, with the revelation of what somebody is and how that pertains to the mystery and the myth behind this whole world of monsters. There's a sudden death of a character that comes as a shock. I'm trying not to give spoilers. And then there's the laying out of a quest, and that involves them going to island after island and doing this and that, a kind of Argonauts type quest. And once you've got that shape in your head, you know where the characters have to go and what they have to overcome. It builds a momentum that's kind of sending us towards the end of this book, and I think it's the first in a trilogy. I just looked up to find out if there were going to be sequels. So that's a good sign. When I do that, when I start Googling, are there going to be sequels to this particular book? I read some ridiculous guff from the publisher online talking about, hyping it up and how she's the kind of writer you can read hundreds of times. I don't think there's many writers you can read hundreds of times. Her prose is quite sticky and quite good at times. I really like some of the descriptive stuff. Some of the fighting scenes, not so much. The best writer of fighting scenes I know is my friend George Mann, actually. People should go and look at what he does, because he doesn't... Hang on, Jeremy! God. It's like being in King of Comedy, that Robert De Niro film. Yeah, so I think sometimes it gets a little bit sketchy in those moments, and you think, how did we get there? Did they jump over there or do that? The kind of precision of movements, perhaps, is something that people really, you have to be very clear on. Sometimes I think with fantasy books, people are used to their audience watching films, and so they present things in a kind of CGI way. You know, when you watch a film with heavy special effects, and you see the characters close to talking, and then you take a jump back and they start twirling around and fighting and jumping out of windows and running about, and they look like computer characters in a game. I think the audience, because they're used to games these days, take that in their stride, and sometimes books do that as well. I like it when we stay close to the characters and feel the impact of the violence, of the excitement and adventure. And I think sometimes she gets that really well. The impact of some of these fights, especially when they're with the kind of weird horses in this palace at one point. That's very bloody and dangerous. But then suddenly dozens of the same horses turn up, and you are forced to see kind of spectacle that's over there somehow. I like it when it stays close to. Anyway, I'm blethering about description. On the whole, her description is marvellous, and it paints pictures. That's one of my big bugbears about fantasy fiction, when I can't see it in my head. Patrick Ness, I've read a few books by, and he doesn't paint pictures inside my head. It's verbal. Who else am I thinking of? The Australian fella. I forget his name. But another one that's really popular, but I couldn't see anything for what he was writing about. It's very odd. I don't know if it's just the way I read them, or if there's something, well, no, it will be something in the writing, that it's not grounded enough in the moment, in the scene around, in colours, in smells, the rest of it, the senses. Yeah. Anyway, blethering on. It's lunchtime, the cat's shouting, Jeremy's shouting, and I think we're going to go out this afternoon. I'm going to try and not buy any books, because I've been buying quite a lot of books online for a project. Call it research. That's what you do. I don't know what I'm going on to next. I'm going to finish this afternoon, I hope. And hope it comes to a good cliffhanger, and there's not too long before volume 2 comes out. Maybe that's been the best triumph of my reading week, actually. I still think about the Armistead Maupin book, because I really do enjoy the characters. But I just want more, and that's not just readerly greed. It's I wanted more from the actual story, I think. Anyway, I'm never happy, am I? Maybe that's what it is, that you never feel entirely satisfied by anything you read, and so you go on and on and on to the next book and the one after that, hoping in some way for the perfect novel. And as we know, there's no such thing. Or is there? Do any of you lot have a sense of what the perfect novel is for you, the one that you can go back perhaps and read hundreds of times? I'm not sure that I've got that. A few contenders perhaps, but maybe not something that would be the ultimate perfect book. Goodbye. I will see you again, and press like and leave comments and go and look at Patreon. But goodbye for now. I'll see you again soon.